This time we're going to be talking about a methodology for brand building, which comes from Japan. It's called Tsunagari brand building. This was a methodology that was conceptualized by McKinsey, was developed by Mazda when I was working with Mazda. I was at the agency JWT at the time, and it's a really useful methodology for trying to look at the long term, particularly for international brands and for those with multiple product offerings. Tsunagari is a Japanese word that doesn't really have a literal translation into English, but the closest that we can get is somewhere in the area of linkage or connection or relationship. It implies something quite deep and quite meaningful. What I want to try and cover in this fairly short session is to talk about what this means and what it's used for. In other words, to introduce a global vision of what a brand stands for and how it can get there, a 3-stage process over something like a 10-year timescale, and to develop an understanding that this affects the entirety of the business. It's not just some marketing toy left to the colouring in department. As mentioned, this was really developed in its original form by McKinsey, but it was adapted and significantly enhanced for use with Mazda and JWT. It's used for the parent brand with multiple sub-brands, but it's relevant to all serious, particularly multinational brand players. And it aims to develop and manage a business with a focus on its brand strength, which in the end is going to give it a competitive advantage and permission to charge a premium price. So it's looking at a strategy and tactics over a considerable window of time, and it's aiming to harmonize the activities and communications of the company in ways that build the brand and therefore build loyalty and enduring relationships, positive relationships with all stakeholders of the brand. For many brands that are purchased for rational reasons, this is a really powerful tool to help move away from the vulnerable rationality of purchasing for price or limited product performance towards more emotional, enduring, and therefore stronger reasons to buy. 3 phases, as I mentioned. No rocket science here. We have an analysis stage, we have a strategy stage, and we have an implement and measure stage. We're going to spend much longer on the first stage. That's the most complicated bit to get right, and the second and third stages kind of follow on from there. Phase 1 is a really deep dive analysis. So we're using available data to understand the current brand in status terms across all of its markets, and then to try and figure out where it's going to be. We're trying to look for a 10-year goal with multiple parameters for the brand across all international borders. And we need to identify the brand target customer very accurately and develop a deep understanding about their brand fit. We need to identify key issues and opportunities. We need to measure the customer journey at all of its stages. We want to describe what our brand stands for today and articulate the gap between that and what we want it to stand for in 10 years' time. And that helps us to develop a description of the brand target positioning and a focused set of KPIs against SMART objectives. Phase 2 is built on a robust understanding of these kind of cause-effect chains. So we're going to identify strategic drivers to close key gaps, and we're going to look for issues to develop towards target positioning. We're going to investigate what it takes to hit the KPI objectives by using the various strategic drivers that we have. And we're going to develop action plans and develop the business case. Phase 3 is all about formulating and updating shorter-term annual operating plans, and we do this every year. Of course, any serious company is going to do an annual operating plan, but using this system, we can make sure that each AOP is a building block on the 10-year plan. So it makes sure that we're marching in the same direction across all of our geographies, across all of our sub-brands to achieve the common goal. So let's crack into phase one and see what this is all about. Typically, this is imposed by a global or regional centre. And I have to say, typically it is deeply resented by the in-market operational teams at first. It's really important to involve not just the regional marketing teams, the local marketing teams, but also the agencies. And you want to be clear about setting roles so that there isn't duplication and people don't discover that they're repeating work that's already been done. But what we're looking to get here is a lot of research, typically a lot of desk research. There may be some primary research as well, looking into the 7 Ps. I don't need to go through all these, but I think it's pretty clear that we want to understand every aspect of every one of these areas of activity, whether it's product or pricing or places, promotions, people, processes, and indeed the political environment, which will help us in defining where we want to get to in 10 years' time. We're going to be doing an awful lot of plotting of this data. And here's just an example of looking at where our brand may be today. So we've got a number of different models. This example is for Mazda. So some people are particularly well aware of things like the MX-5 or the Mazda 3, and not very aware of some other things like a BT50. And people feel pretty good about some vehicles and less good about others in the range. The size of the bubble also indicates the scale in terms of volume sales. You've got to be really careful about how you select axes for these sorts of charts. You want to make sure that they are key differentiators and they're not just quality and price. It could be measures of relevance to your target audience. It could be measures of price elasticity. It might be about location. It might be about product range. It might be about sportiness. It might be about design style. But choose your axes really carefully and use these to separate and categorize and therefore spot gaps in your own product portfolio. And then you can plan evolution or even, as Toyota did for instance, plan a new brand with Lexus. We can also look at where we would want to move or where there may be particular problems or issues with individual parts of our portfolio. This is actually a real-life example, and so the axes on here are much less relevant than the relative position of attributes. So what this has done is using cluster analysis on a very large statistical quantitative survey to tease out various attributes that people feel about cars. So those get laid down first, and the cluster analysis allows us to see what is proximal to other similar attributes. Overlaid on that are different brands, and you can see those brands on the chart here. If you look towards the left, you can see where Mazda was in 2001. And through a reasonably comprehensive process of marketing, we had managed to move that brand up to a new position where it wasn't just a tin box sold very cheap, and you can see that from the attributes around where it was. It was now considered to be more sporty, a bit more spirited, a bit more like a fun brand or a slightly progressive brand. Our intention, having done this exercise, was to move into this area where we are competing more with brands like Audi and Alfa Romeo and perhaps less with Honda. And we're looking at attributes such as being stylish, athletic, spirited, fun to drive, with responsive handling and performance. Obviously, you can plot these sorts of graphs for many brands as long as you've got the data to underpin it. And now we're looking at the road to our vision, where we consider where the brand is today and where the brand should be in the longer term, up to 10 years away. The data shows us that currently brand position, or in the recent past, the brand position and perception, the image in consumers' minds, has been very varied because of different uncoordinated marketing activity. And of course, if we look at multiple countries, we can see that there are different positionings in all sorts of different places. That's not a great place for our brand to be, and that's why it's called the lost past. What we want to do is establish where we need to be, and we do that by writing down, quantifying the brand bullseye. Where do we want it to be on all of those 7P metrics in 10 years' time? And we use tools like the brand architecture and brand scorecard to do that. And then we can articulate the gap between where we are now and where we want to be in 10 years' time. And we know that our strategy is going to involve building the brand, managing the brand across all of our territories and harmonizing those differences from different countries to give us a consistent global brand positioning. And of course, there is this gap between where we are and where we want to be. And over the 10-year time span, we want to make sure that we are narrowing that gap consistently throughout the time window. We move from the lost past into a time when we're establishing what's going on. We are embarking on our strategic journey and we are closing on our destination. Throughout this whole process, it's very easy to get lost in the data and it's very easy to forget what our most valuable asset is. Now, you may think this is going to be different for different companies, different brands. Is it about the real estate that you own? Is it about the inventory that you have? Particularly in a time of COVID, a lot of companies have huge inventories that they can't shift. Is it actually about the brand? We've talked about brand value. Is it about your people, your employees? Are they your most valuable asset? Well, I'm sorry to say that it is none of those things. Without question, you have to put your customer at the center of everything you do. They are your only valuable asset. If you don't have customers, you don't have a business. And you've probably heard me say it before, and I will say it again, that all businesses exist to deliver experiential value to customers and other stakeholders. If they don't deliver experiential value, they don't deserve to exist. So phase one is largely from a customer point of view. And what we want to try and do is understand customer journeys. That means we've got to really carefully segment our audiences. We're going to have numbers of segments which are going to be of interest to us. So we want to understand those segments. They may be different in different geographies. They'll certainly be different in other metrics, whether that be age or gender or drivability or income or education, whatever it might be. We want to analyze the needs, the wants, the behaviors of all of those people. We want to see how they respond to competitors, what they like and don't like about us, like and don't like about our competitors, and build character portraits for each one of the segments that we think are going to be attractive. Then we might conduct day in the life of analyses for each one. So we're looking at a typical day for an individual who's a bullseye target for one of our products, one of our sub-brands, and thinking about every minute of that day, what they're doing, where they are, what are the media opportunities or touch points which exist, what's their mindset at that point in time, and therefore what messaging is going to be most appropriate. We can use all that stuff then to review, to prioritize the touch points, to see where we want to focus our activities, and therefore build a plan or a strategy to communicate effectively with them. I mentioned brand architecture and brand scorecard. These are the phase one tools. So the brand architecture is about explaining the relationship between different sub-brands. So in our case, we were talking about Mazda being the parent brand, but models like the MX-5 or the Mazda 3 or the Mazda 6 being the sub-brands. And we wanted to explain the hierarchical relationship. Brands like Jaguar Land Rover have a real problem with that, because if you think about certain models in the Land Rover range, it's JLR is the parent company, Jaguar Land Rover, and then it's Land Rover, and then maybe it's Range Rover, and then maybe it's Evoque. So what is this vehicle? You might end up with a hierarchy which looks something like Jaguar Land Rover, Range Rover, Evoque, Sport. It's very confusing for the consumer. So we want to make that architecture as simple as possible to help enable the consumer to connect with our brand, but also to help us to identify any local issues in particular markets or countries, and therefore what counteractions might be needed to overcome those issues. The brand scorecard replaces each layer of the brand architecture with specific and measurable KPIs. So that means that we move from a theoretical plan to an action-based plan. It enables consistent and comprehensive implementation of our plan and measurement of our achievements towards the common goal that we want to get to. And we'll look at both of these things in slightly more detail now. The brand architecture looks like this. It starts at a base layer with the brand compliant touchpoint layer. So in here we have effectively 5 of our 7 P's. So we have product, we have people, we have promotion, we have pricing, and we have place. And each of those things has its own attributes, and each of them need to be measured and iterated properly. But they feed up into the brand management layer. Now, this doesn't suggest that the product and people feed into brand awareness and nothing else. The whole lot feeds into the next layer up, which is all about awareness and strength and differentiation. They feed up into the performance layer, where we're actually looking at what's happening in real life. So we're looking at brand share in the market. We're looking at how our brand cycle is performing. We're looking at loyalty from our customer base, and of course the financial metrics as well. And finally, that feeds up into brand equity. So we move, if you like, from the theoretical layer down into the action layer. We commit the actions, we measure what happens, and that then informs our theory as we come back into the cycle. Looking at a specific example of effects caused through this thing, we're going to be looking at one particular case. So we're looking at increasing our website traffic, and that's come through our communication strategy. What effect does that have? Well, it certainly has an effect on brand awareness and familiarity, and it has an effect on sharpening our brand differentiation, because people are more aware, are more familiar with us, and therefore they understand why we're different from competitors. That then has an effect on brand strength against our competitors. And if our brand strength improves, we then help to build our brand funnel, which is part of the sales funnel, which I'm sure you're familiar with. We can look at that at another time. And if the brand funnel is strengthened, then our brand equity is going to be strengthened, and we build a more loyal customer base, and we can charge more for it. So the brand scorecard acts as a bridge between the long-term strategic plan and the short-term annual operating plans. And it takes elements from each and contributes to those elements on each as well. It operationalizes all elements of the strategy. It makes them accountable, it tracks improvements, and it shows areas for attention. And that is obviously specific to individual countries and individual time periods. So we're looking at the business plan, we're looking within that at the brand building plan, and within that at the marketing plan over the long term. And short term, obviously there is a brand building and marketing plan in every year's AOP. And we want to make sure that those things are all aligned, are contributing to the same KPIs, and are building to the brand strategy. In the case of Mazda, there were 10 questions that were asked. These questions are pretty common across all brands. They obviously can be customized. They seem like simple questions at first reading, but actually, in order to do this properly, you need substantive data to be able to understand the realities of what's going on in each country. I'm not going to go through these questions. I suggest you pause and have a look at the 10 questions. But they're starting with at the bottom of the chart, strangely, with the operational touchpoint KPIs. And those are the ones that are going to strengthen the power of our brand within a short-term focus. So we want to make sure that we get those right. Moving up a layer, we're looking at the brand management KPIs. And those are fed by what's gone on in 7, 8, 9, and 10. And they will help us to ensure that the business is growing properly, that the brand is growing properly, that strength is increasing, and long-term profit is going to increase. And that obviously feeds up into the top 3, where we're able to see the fruits of our work. Have our efforts actually enabled us to build that brand equity? And there we're looking between 3 and 5 years, and obviously that's a rolling 3 and 5 years, so that by the time we get to the 10-year plan, we have achieved what we wanted to achieve. The quant data that you need to populate these or answer these questions needs to be repeated every year at a bare minimum, and quite possibly several times a year, depending on the market, the product category, the competitors, the brand. So you've got to have some budget allocation to do that research in order to address the KPIs that you've set. These things are analysed against various different metrics, but obviously against our KPIs. They're analysed in a temporal sense and they're analysed in a competitive sense. We can use a simple traffic light system, red, amber, and green. So if we're comparing ourselves against competitors or markets or over time, we can see whether there's a problem by simple color coding and see the dynamics of that problem by the direction of the arrow. The deliverables from brand building phase 1 are that you will be able to get a clear picture of your brand in your combined markets. You'll be able to see how the markets differ from each other. You'll be able to understand the gap in each market between where you are now and where you want to be in 10 years' time. And you'll be able to identify the key targets, both in terms of customers and in terms of your offerings to match those customers over the longer term. So it helps to identify and iterate your product strategy as well as your brand strategy. It shows up any problems that exist in any individual market or indeed in the whole piece. And of course, it allows you to answer the questions of anybody who's querying your business because you've got data and metrics to feed your KPIs. This is actually a real spreadsheet indicating some of these things. It's obviously way too small to read, but it shows the level of data that is being picked up. This is one tiny piece. It's an overview spreadsheet. Behind this are lots and lots of other spreadsheets with all of that data. So as I say, those key deliverables, they are fed by things that we are already familiar with. So PESTEL analyses are really important to understand the external environment. A SWOT analysis helps us to marry problems from the PESTEL, the external, with both problems and opportunities in the internal environment. We look at competitors. We look at the overall market. We understand what are the key dynamics for our market and where we have strengths and weaknesses or anchor points. We use the scorecard in the way that we've looked, better understand our target, and we better focus our resources to address that target. And all of that helps us to build a strong brand equity on the brand diamond. Here's an example of some prioritization of sub-brands as a consequence of phase 1. So here we're looking at a brand contribution index, which is an amalgam of brand awareness, of share of target group, and of position in life cycle, against, on the horizontal axis, how much each of these sub-brands contributes to our business, which is a multiple of sales times profit. Size of bubble indicates size of market, and you can see that while some models contribute quite a large amount, they don't necessarily contribute very much in terms of the brand, whereas others, who don't actually sell very much and therefore don't contribute much in terms of profit, have a big contribution to the way that the brand is perceived by the target. Another example, this is looking at the scorecard, as you know, and here we have the traffic light in operation. Unfortunately, there's an awful lot of reds, and there's nothing going uphill. So you can see on the bottom layer, the brand compliance layer, that we have issues in 3 areas, but the brand at retail, in other words, the dealership network for Mazda, is doing very well, but it's flat, it's not increasing. Next layer up, we're kind of okay on awareness, but not as good as we want to be, and we're not changing. Brand differentiation from our competitors is bad and getting worse, so we've got a problem there. And those things feed up to the brand performance layer, where we are not doing well in the brand funnel. The brand funnel takes us from awareness through familiarity to likability to consideration to purchase. We're not doing well in loyalty. Our loyalty is decreasing. And we're not doing particularly well in terms of being able to charge a premium price for our product. So that's just an example of the sort of management output you can get from this analysis. In phase 2, we're going to start to do some strategizing. No real rocket science here, but if we start off with what we've looked at in phase 1, in other words, trying to figure out our brand identity, the situation, the position in the market, the position against competitors, the position in the mind of the consumer. So, analysis of the physical, mental, and social components of the brand regarding their centrality, their durability, and their salience. We then move into analysis of the technological, cultural, social, political, economic, and competitive environment in which the brand operates, and its position within each of these spheres. Analysis of the category and the brand users, their motivation, purchasing behavior, and product and brand perceptions and distribution forces. Why is the brand there? Well, here we're looking at diagnosis of the environmental developments and the brand's history to uncover the basis for its current position. So what factors are responsible for its market position and for recent developments, whether they be growth or decline or stability in that market position? Next, where could the brand be? And here we define the goals, which have to be attainable given the environmental forces and the resources available for the development of the brand. Consumer perception and consumer behavior objectives, as well as channel objectives, are iterated here. Next, how can we get there? Which strategies could and or should be followed to reach these goals? We want to make decisions on the balance between push and pull strategies, on advertising framework, on media strategy, and on message strategy. And finally, in the green circle, is the brand getting there? And here we're looking at the development and application of a brand monitoring system covering the essential market development and brand performance factors and relating these to the actions on the brand and, of course, on its competitors. There's no action without reaction. And all that feeds into where the brand is the next time we go around this circle. We will arrive at a strategy summary and approval page. Now, again, I don't really want to go through every component on this, but we can see here that we have a statement of positioning. This is a real-life example. I don't think it's a particularly good positioning statement, but it does give a sense of where we're trying to go, and in particular to achieve mildly premium pricing. We iterate all the KPIs, the major KPIs, where we are now and what our target is going to be. We look at the key attributes that we have. We look at, for the brand, what are the key pillars for building that brand? But also, we look at the icon. What is it that people recognize as the iconic part of our brand? And we spell out the competitors. And we have a map which positions where we are, and indeed, we can use that to show where we want to go. So the phase 2 approach is kind of midterm. It's not the short term. It's not necessarily the 10-year. But it's a consistent action plan which allows you to see things over the medium to longer term. It allows you to address key issues in a strategic sense rather than a tactical sense, and to get to those anchor points that you've set. Importantly, this is not just marketing. It is operation-wide. And when you think about the 7 Ps, you're thinking about dealerships, you're thinking about sales, you're thinking about the way you staff your operation. You're thinking about pricing. You're thinking about R&D and product development. So all key functions are included. And the action plan has to support the viability of the overall business, not just a few jobs in marketing. You will find that you get accused of just spending money for the sake of it. It isn't that. Nor is it a way of trying to say to people, we need to cut your budgets, or we need to get more budgets. It's a way of looking at the overall picture and determining what's necessary. And it certainly isn't just another idea from the colouring in department. So there's the scorecard from phase 1. We use that. We notice where there are issues. We notice where there are problems that need to be sorted out, and we can actually iterate from that pretty clearly what needs to be done. There's another problem, but there is a good thing. So we know we've got a strength. And maybe that's where we want to keep our focus, because we can play to it. If we promise a good dealership experience and deliver it, our customers will be happier. So the deliverables from phase 2 are different from phase 1, obviously enough. Here we are looking at 5-year planning assumptions. We're looking at the key attributes that we have for our brand and or product mix. We're looking at the role of those brands. And don't forget, we're talking about multiple sub-brands here across the markets. We're looking at the key touch points where we have the greatest chance of influencing our target audience. We're looking at strategic initiatives that we can take in order to create that influence, and we can prioritize those initiatives. So we know what we've got to do this year, we know what we want to do next year or the year after, and we know what it would be lovely to do one day, but we simply don't have the resource or the time or the money, or indeed it doesn't contribute to a key strategic pillar. We iterate those strategic pillars, and we lay against each one a series of initiatives that will help us to achieve those strategic pillars. And finally, we have a roadmap, which is a bit like a Gantt chart, but indicating through the course of 3 to 5 years all of the activities that are going to build on each other in order to get us to where we need to be in 10 years' time. So moving into phase 3, if you're still with me. Phase 3 is really straightforward. It's very easy, because most people do this anyway. Most firms insist on having annual operating plans, but the difference here is that they're not done in isolation. They're absolutely done underneath the umbrella of our 10-year strategic roadmap. So we use the AOP to build on what we've done last year and to create the foundation for what we're going to do next year. And that means that we know we are on the path to achieve our 10-year goal for what the brand looks like. It means that we can prioritize and promote things which are going to facilitate success in achieving that 10-year goal, and downgrade or ignore things which are not going to contribute. We can establish budgeting priorities against the 10-year objective, and importantly, we can look at the KPIs to make sure that the actions are appropriate and are achieving the goals set for them. Measurement is clearly key. It's a critical part of smart objectives. There's no point in having KPIs unless we can measure against them. So we've got to have this research in place in order to be able to provide the data that will feed this model. And then we can track either on a continuous basis or on at least a regular quarterly, biannual basis, which means that we can update the brand scorecard as regularly as possible, and we can use the measurements from this cycle to inform the next cycle and thereafter when we move into next year's AOP and the year after's AOP. And of course, what's critical here is that you can use this stuff as an incentive program within HR. How often have you seen local managers incentivize purely on sales, whereas the centre may want to increase brand metrics? Local management don't see any point in brand metrics because that's slow burn, long term, and doesn't get them the bonus that they need. But using this system, you can actually incentivize local management on brand metrics as well as on raw sales. So it's a very powerful tool if it's used properly. So that's Tsunagari, brand building. Thank you for listening. I hope it's been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.